Good afternoon everyone. My name is Claire Robinson. I'm the Customer Relationship Manager here at KRC. Thank you for joining us. This is our fourth of our monthly Agile webinars. So far we have covered mastering the basics of Agile and how to move forward. We've looked at how to engage with the business or customer more effectively. Last month we looked at facilitation and facilitated workshops, and today we're going to be looking at modelling. So if you've missed any of the previous webinars, you can still download the recordings. So just drop us an email and we'll send you the link. And if you'd like to download the slides to any of the webinars, you can find them under the free downloads section on AgileKRC.com. Today's slides won't be up on our website. That's because we've got a new website coming soon. It'll be live in about a couple of weeks. And so today's slides will be up on the new website then. But if you do want them sooner, do drop me an email. My email address is going to be on the last slide. So make a note of that. Drop me an email and I'll send today's slides over to you. Next month's webinar is going to take place on Monday the 21st of May at 12:30, and that one is going to be on PRINCE2 and Agile. So I'm shortly going to pass you over to your presenter Keith Richards, but just before I do, I just want to point out a couple of the features of the control panel, just in case this is your first time using this software. So if you look at the top right hand side of your screen, you'll see an orange box with a white arrow inside. You can click on this to maximize or minimize your control panel, and if you'd like to ask a question, just type your question into the question box and Keith will take these at the end. So I'll now pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards.
Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome to everybody. Welcome back again to some familiar names that I'm seeing there on the list. We've got people from all over the world again: New Zealand, Norway, Canada, and also Thailand. So very warm welcome to everybody. And let's have a look at this subject area of modelling, particularly in an Agile context. So just a few intros, and just to go through a couple of things to start with, just to show you the structure of what we're going through. Looking to finish this in about 35 minutes from now, and then we can take 10 minutes questions and answers. So I'll go through some simple introductions, give you some of the basics of modelling, what the benefits are, why I personally think it's a very important and underused area on projects or in any form of work, how to best utilize it, some, if you like, tips and advice and some tricks, and we'll finish off with some further information at the end if you need it. We do, as part of these webinars, try to go very sparing on the advertising, and I'll leave some things at the end for Claire to talk you through later on. Just a very brief introduction about myself for those that don't know me, just so that you can get a context of where I'm coming from. The founder of KRC, we like to think of ourselves very much as a pioneering training and consultancy company. We don't just do the regular stuff, we try and think and try and be quite advanced. And I think this modelling example is a good example of where we sort of see things that we think are quite powerful, and hope you're going to get some messages from this webinar. We specialise in Agile. We've been doing it for a long time. As we always say, we've been doing it since before the term Agile was invented, which is true. Also got a lot of knowledge of PRINCE2, so putting it in more sort of corporate environments. Very much specialist in DSDM, Dynamic Systems Development Method, which is a method that's growing tremendously quickly at the moment as people try to go to Agile with a bit of structure. Also done some facilitation, written a book on project management, and I was very pleased to be voted the MVP, the most valuable Agile player at the UK Agile Awards last year. Anyway, enough of the intros. At least you can see where I'm coming from. So if we now get into some advice on modelling, and first things first is to really describe what it is. There's a lot of people who don't realise what modelling actually covers. It's nothing to do with Naomi Campbell or Airfix kits. It's actually simply a case of drawing pictures diagramming. Just about any picture that you draw is going to be a model, maybe with the exception of a bar chart or a pie chart. Anytime you start to represent something graphically or visually, you are in effect modeling. One of the key things a model is trying to do is abstract key information. So whenever you're modeling, you need to focus on the fact that it is an abstraction. What information have I got to get across? I've seen many models that have tremendous amounts of information on, lots of syntax, and actually what gets lost is the actual overall message. A really good example of a model is the London Underground map. It's an abstraction of the information. It doesn't actually look like that on the ground, but it gives enough information for a user to find their way around London. Key to modeling, and we're not talking here about financial models in Excel, but key to modeling is the act of visualization, actually drawing it so somebody can actually see it. And another key thing that we're trying to get with modeling is simplification. So trying to get the message across as quickly as possible. So whenever you're thinking of modeling, feel free, I'm not saying liberate yourself, but feel free that this is quite simply drawing pictures, and the key things you're trying to do is abstract the key information, make it simple, and get it to go visual. Now, why would you want to model? And part of the reasons for this whole webinar is to really address why you should model, but also to address why very few people are actually modeling. You know, why is it so underused? So one of the key things about modeling is the idea of visualization, and as the saying goes, a picture paints 1,000 words. Now, I was reliably informed a while ago that a university, I think it was in San Diego, did a lot of research, and they actually proved that a picture does actually paint 1,000 words. Now, why on earth you'd want to spend your time doing that, I don't know, but if you want some factual hard information behind that statement, it looks like it might actually be true. So if we've got a picture and it's worth 1,000 words, that's going to be really good in terms of communication, because if we're using visualization to communicate, it means we've got less reliance on text, on email, and on written documents. Now, I'm not trying to say we need to model and not write anything, you know, quite the opposite, but as a sort of complementary way of working, something to add diagrams, models to what you're writing, it can be extremely powerful. And what we're trying to do, if we get the right level of abstraction, simplification, and visualization, what we end up getting is a couple of key things for when you're working on your project. We get things like speed. We get information getting moved around an organization or a project or a team quickly, and we also get it accurately. When you're talking or when you're emailing, there is so much jargon, so much room for inaccuracies to creep in. And just a simple example, it is rather simplistic, but if you were ever going to ask to get directions to somewhere, let's say you're meeting someone in town for, I don't know, for a drink or a meal, you could just imagine trying to write those directions purely in textual form. You naturally lend yourself to picking up a piece of paper, grabbing a pen, and writing some sort of diagram. When and where can you model? In very simple terms, you can model absolutely any time, sort of any time, anywhere. And what I'm trying to achieve very much with this webinar is to get people to feel free and go for it with the modeling, because at the start of a project or any piece of work, things like context diagrams, scoping the project, what is the project about, what are we trying to achieve, a picture can be very, very powerful at this point. During the project, for example, things like plans, flow diagrams, representing data, representing what the business looks like. If we can keep going visual, keep drawing things, it's going to be very powerful. So when can you model? The answer is absolutely at any time. Where can you model? And I think, again, this is where it's often underutilized, is that if you go into deep technical areas, and I don't just mean software engineering, or just pure engineering, you can often find these areas very dry and quite hard to fathom out. I don't know how many people listening are, say, project managers, and they're working with a team of technical people, and sometimes it can be not necessarily intimidating, but very frustrating that you haven't actually got a clue what somebody's actually talking about when they go off into jargon. If you have some common vocabulary, though, or draw a picture, or can you explain that to me in graphical terms, often these very apparently complex technical areas can be broken down and simplified. A lot of the time it's by, something like metaphor. One of the techniques that I used with one customer, it was a very complicated project, and it was to do with actuarials and actuaries, and it was the most complex number crunching thing I think I've ever come across, even more complicated than utilities or telecom billing, and it was just about impossible to really understand what was going on. So what we did was try to create some graphical representations of what was going on. So it was a calculation engine, and it was referred to as an engine. So by drawing a picture of a train or an engine with carriages, we managed to break down the complexity of this a problem area so that we could start talking in language we could understand. Now, I've tried to be just very simple with that, but the fact we got a visualization, the fact we got some sort of graphical representation of it meant that we could start talking about different parts of the engine, and we could use more sort of English terms rather than the technical terms. So this, as I say, helped immensely to get an understanding of what the project was about. Now, it also applies for just vague non-technical areas like blue sky thinking, as the saying goes, general business areas, where are we trying to go as an organization. Sometimes it's called visioning. This again is where you can model. So the simple point about this slide is to try and say you can use it anywhere, anytime. Don't restrict yourself. And ironically, the more difficult the situation, my opinion is, the more vital it is that you actually model. Having said all of that, modelling faces a problem. I've been fortunate enough to be working with hundreds and hundreds of companies over many, many years, and a few things always strike me as interesting, and one of them is the fact that I find modelling is very much underused, underutilised. I often do exercises on training courses with companies, and I get them to come up and draw models on the flip chart. And I basically say to a room full of a dozen people, right, get yourself in pairs, what models do you use, come and draw them on the flip chart, and let's see what you're used to and what you like using. Now, when people walk up to the flip chart, I often refer to it, and I hope nobody minds this, but I refer to it as the walk of death. The look on the faces of people when they come up to draw something is they feel intimidated. I'm not sure if I know the syntax. Will I get laughed at? I'm not sure what it's called. And the irony about this, what I call the walk of death, is it's absolutely normal. It's 80% of people that I see on a training course or I talk to in a sort of live environment have the same sort of level of knowledge of modelling. And I think this is based on two reasons. The first one is that if the model is a little bit simple or a bit noddy, it's classed as being childish and perhaps not particularly professional. Having said that, if we go the other way and we draw a very complex model with lots of syntax, then it's seen as being too confusing because it's too advanced. And what happens is you get the double whammy, the catch-22, that we end up doing neither, and we end up just writing copious amounts of text. So modeling's facing a problem, and this webinar is going to try to get you to think about how we can break this problem. So how best can we use modelling? And what I want people to think about is really harnessing the power of modelling, because there's a lot of benefits and a lot of pluses with it. So start talking to your colleagues, start talking to other teams, start talking to senior management, start talking to them in pictures, convey the messages in pictures. I don't just mean in pure art, I mean, yes, you can support it with text, but the more visual you go, the better it is. People are often well, there's different research over different parts of the planet, but there is a strong propensity of most people to use visual systems. We see things in pictures. We engage with the media with pictures. If you drive up and down a road anywhere around the world, there's lots of logos, symbols, pictures. We're very much into visual systems. Not solely, but it is a very big method for connecting and moving around information. One specific example I would give you is something like user stories. A lot of Agile people have now gone in a very big way into let's write user stories. So you have index cards, people writing as a stock controller, I want to, etc., etc. But it's very textual. Where is the modeling? Where is the graphical view of this to try and support that information? Because if you can get the two in harnessed, you have a very, very powerful combination. Right, I just want to engage everyone now in a poll. So I want you to have a look at your screens, if you would please, because I have a question for you. And the first question I'm going to ask you is just to see what experiences of certain modeling techniques you've used. Now, don't worry if you've not used any of the ones that I'm going to come up with. You might have used them all. You might have used none of them. So what I'd like you to do is to just select those that you've used, as in the question. So which of these modeling techniques have you used? And don't worry if you don't know what UML is or use cases, but I'd be very interested to just get a feeling from the people on the webinar as to what level of usage we've got of these, which I see as regular suspects in my travels. One other thing I want to try and achieve with this poll is to get everyone on the webinar to see what's normal in other organizations or what's not so normal. Now I'm going to give you about another 10 seconds there, and I will then show you what the results are. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now, so the results should shortly be on your screen, and we'll have a look at what the information coming back is in terms of what's actually come out from that poll. And I think those results are quite interesting. Not everybody's used all of them, so nothing's on 100%, but the top two are flowcharts and swimlane diagrams. Swimlane diagrams similar to flowcharts, but actually putting a little bit more structure around it. A lot of people, 74%, using informal diagrams, which I'm really pleased to see, because part of the point of this session is to try to get you using a lot more informal diagrams. Some of the more heavyweight approaches are at the top there, use cases, so 7 out of 10 people are using that, and half the people are actually using UML. And what we'll do now is we're going to go and have a look at those and see what role they have to get you thinking about how best to apply them. So what I'm going to do now is just close that screen there with the poll, and we're going to have a little look at some more things specifically. Oh, hang on. Just one moment there. Right, so let's have a look at some examples of some modeling, and we've just gone through those 5, UML, use cases, flowcharts and rich pictures and swim lanes. And we're going to go through those, and I'm going to try and give you the relative merits of each one as an opinion. And it might be an opinion you disagree with, which is absolutely fine, but as I say, that's part of the reasons for the webinar, is to get you thinking about what works and maybe what doesn't. So the first one I want to mention is UML, Unified Modeling Language. Remember, half of you have used it. Now, one of my problems with UML is it's very rich in syntax, and if we look at some of those symbols there on the screen, it's very difficult to tell what exactly some of these things might actually be doing. So, for example, there you've got the sort of bendy curve, you've got these blocks, you know, what do these blocks mean, what are these arrows doing, what does this dotted line mean? And from a point of view of communicating, I find that UML is very hard to understand in general terms. Now, specific people might know what it is. This is a sequence diagram, and as long as the whole audience knows what UML is and what all the syntax means, then it's fine. And it might be that it's used just between, say, software developers, but the problem is when it's used in a wider context, because it's so specific with the syntax, it can be quite difficult to use. I just want to try one thing on my screen a moment, if you'll just forgive me. Hang on. Claire, I need your help. Is the screen, can everybody see the screen okay? I think you can, actually.
Yep, it looks fine to me.
Was there some slight flashing around of the screen then for a moment or not?
Not really. We did go over to your...
Right, okay, I'm sorry about that. I've now got myself back in organisation mode because I can't see some of the controls. But the second one I want to look at there is use cases. Thanks, Claire. Use case is very popular. Remember in the poll we had something like 70% on use cases. And again, UML and use cases are probably two of the most popular modelling techniques I see. But with that come really a plethora of problems that a lot of people struggle sometimes to know exactly what these things are saying. You can't beat a well-written use case diagram, but does the audience reading it know what it actually means? Many moons ago I was on an SSADM project, and I remember looking at a diagram, and the diagram had something very similar to this. It had an ellipse with a slash through the side of the ellipse, and I spent a good 20 minutes walking around the organisation trying to find out if somebody knew what that meant. And eventually I did find someone, and they told me it means that it appears somewhere else on the same page. Now that was an immediately disappointing moment because I thought it was going to be quite exciting, but it wasn't. And this is why I'm trying to give an illustration here of syntax. What does the syntax help or hinder? Now this is a use case diagram, and as you can see from some of the actors on the diagram, they have a slash through their head. But what does it mean? And if it's not obvious what it means, and I'll be straight with you, from use cases I don't actually know what this means, does it add any value? Some other diagrams will have no slash through the ellipse, what's the difference? But if you've got to go and be trained in it or look it up, it means the message is not coming across very clearly. Now let's be clear what I'm saying with UML and use case. They have a role, they can be useful, but they can also be counterproductive. It could be we're drawing diagrams, we're getting the message slightly clouded, and what I'm trying to say is do what works, but don't slavishly follow a technique when in fact you spend more time looking at the syntax and less time trying to actually convey a message. Now here's one that I'm a great fan of, the flowchart, and good to see that most people are using it. Very, very light and simple in syntax, so everybody can understand it. Everybody knows what's actually going on. But again, this is where people can sometimes go over the top. A well-placed symbol like a connector, like the A you can see here, can add something to the diagram and could be quite useful. But equally, do we need the start and end lozenge? I have many arguments with people about, oh, the flowchart isn't correct, it's missing a start lozenge. Well, personally, I really don't care. As long as the model gets the information across, then just go for it. A flowchart is trying to give information. It's so simple in syntax that everybody can use it, and I'd say, more power to the flowchart. So sometimes simple flowcharting can win over use case diagram because it's easier for everyone to see. So don't be scared of simple. Don't be scared of something that looks, potentially a bit childish. They can be highly powerful and highly effective. Another example of what works really, really well, and this is something I'd love everybody to try because over the last sort of 15 years I've found this to be one of the most powerful ways of working, and it's not just at the front of the project or bigger picture stuff. Rich pictures, the idea of drawing, is extremely powerful, and certainly on the training courses that we do, we try and press this button as hard as we can with our customers, because when we find they go down this route, suddenly the project comes alive, communication comes alive. And I've seen many instances where SSADM has been used, it's not working, and we've moved an organisation to using rich pictures, and suddenly everybody's running around with the diagrams and they suddenly know what's going on. Now the thing I want to sort of see about this picture is, one, it's informal, it's the syntax is, if you like, drawn on a sort of as and when needed basis. And by syntax, I'm talking about things like this. If you look at this double-headed arrow that's in bold, that's obviously very different to this sort of thing, which is a single arrow, or this thing here, which is a dotted line. People do different things. People can annotate it with questions and how are we going to do this. But as you can see from this diagram, it uses a lot of visualization. It uses things like symbols like this, like a telephone. And I remember once drawing a telephone in a rich picture, saying, okay, the phone call comes in, and the first thing somebody said to me was, it could be an email. And I thought, okay, phone call or email. So I wrote email up by the telephone, and then the next thing was someone put a hand up and said, it could be a fax as well, by the way. Okay, it could be a fax, could be an email, could be a phone. And even then somebody actually said, I don't know if this matters, Keith, but we're actually wearing headsets. So I sort of said it didn't really matter too much, but you know, whatever. At least we're now communicating and information is flying around a project. Another example which got a very high score, a lot higher than I thought it would actually, to be honest, is the fact that swim lanes, and these just seem to be so simple, so powerful, but it shows a bit more than just a flowchart. It's showing, if you like, the who, an area. This could be buying, an admin, it could be a person. But again, very simple type flowchart symbols and putting some structure. But be careful with swim lanes, because sometimes it can get in the way. Sometimes trying to find out what the swim lane is doesn't add any value. If you don't know where the boundaries are, you know, just draw a simple flowchart and don't let the syntax get in the way. So most of the time, swim lanes can be quite productive. But again, we're talking process. This wouldn't be very good if we're talking about MIS reporting necessarily. So you need to use the right thing at the right time. So how do we simplify this? How do we move forward? And the simplest thing to do is actually to try and debunk all this modeling, all these fancy words like use case, UML, data flow diagram, process map, and actually go with some advice from someone from many moons ago called Rudyard Kipling. Now, I don't know how many of you know him and things like Jungle Book or the Scouts, the Cubs, etc. But he came out with a superb quote and line in some of his books. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. And these are also known as the 6 W's. And this idea of just focusing on the what, the why, the how is a very simple way to get effective modeling off the ground in very simple terms. So when you're modeling, just think simply, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a who model? So for example, an organization chart. Are we talking about a what model? So things like data modeling or information relationships are very much what. A process or a flow chart or the swim lanes is, if you like, a how model, how things sort of move through the process. If you're drawing something like an architecture diagram and you're showing a big fluffy cloud, meaning the internet, or physically where things are located behind firewalls or whatever, this could be a more physical location or where diagram. Some things are called state transition diagrams or entity life histories, but it doesn't matter what they're called. If you're trying to show the progress of something like an application for a mortgage, you know, applied, approved, defunct. These are what are called state transitions, and therefore, in simple terms, using Kipling's idea, they're just simply when diagrams. Visioning statements, you know, why are we doing this? What's the project about? You can use this very much as a sort of a why. So if you use the 6 W's, and with all the people listening, I know there's going to be quite a few of you going, I don't class how as a W, which you're perfectly entitled to do, and therefore you might want to call it 5 W's and an H. To be honest, that normally splits a room. Some people are happy that they're 6 W's and some people are not. So go with whatever you need, but just remember, I'm not saying there's only 6 types of model. I'm actually saying you can combine these. So the swim lanes is very much about process, so that's how, but it's also about who in terms of the department that we might be referring to. So combinations are fine. It's just what I'm suggesting you do is just keep it simple and work out, I think I'm going to draw a what model on this. And the importance of working this way is that some projects lend themselves to certain models. If it is a workflow application, this is going to be very much about how. But if you're talking about business intelligence or MIS, management information systems, they're not really that processy. Therefore, you might be wanting to draw what models. And again, you can call them something complicated if you like, but I find it intimidating sometimes to business representatives who even the word data model or data flow diagram is just not really there in their lexicon in terms of the terms they might use. Information, yeah, but as I say, process mapping and such like, we need to sort of dumb this down so that we don't lose the message somewhere in all the jargon. Now, importantly, an idea of where you could actually create a model is where you have a project. So one piece of advice I would give people is to try and use a sort of metaphor or a simple project like you saw with that rich picture to try to get you a feeling of how you can convey the message about what a project is all about. So my advice to you is to try and be very creative and perhaps use some sort of metaphor. Now, I'm not mandating or strongly recommending that approach, but the idea of a metaphor might work quite handily. You might have a project and you can just symbolize it with something that then everybody becomes conversant with, and it's seen as a really good way of moving information around a project. As I say, this can be very, very useful. You choose the syntax and go with what works. But be very, very careful, because sometimes you can pick a wrong metaphor. And one customer I worked with, it was a while ago, but it was on a data warehouse project. They decided as a metaphor to use a black hole as the way of collecting all the information. Now, to start with, it was quite attractive. No matter where the data was in the organization, it all got sucked into this data warehouse, and everybody seemed quite excited about that. I must admit, I could see the end game, so I was a little bit concerned, and of course it only dawned on them later on that one of the properties of a black hole is nothing actually comes out of it. Now, if that wasn't enough of a problem, the double irony was that actually did turn out to be the case, as the data warehouse was so complicated nobody could actually use the thing. So just go careful with the metaphor, but as I say, using some sort of metaphor can help convey the information about what the project's all about. Another good area for modelling, again underused, is when you're planning. So if you like, using a plan to come up with a model, using a model to come up with a plan, again can be extremely powerful. And this is why I'm saying, again, be creative. The plan you have is so important to manage and control that if the model itself is giving a lot of the information that the team and the project manager needs, it's doing half the job for you. There's something called the TUQ test, T-U-Q, which stands for the ultimate question. And a sort of thing that I would try, that in any plan you've got anywhere, can you actually go up to the thing and say, I know where we are, or we are in control? So if somebody handed you a plan and said, this is where it is, how quickly could you actually understand the status of the project? And I'm literally saying, could you be completely familiar with every bit of information on that piece of paper within 10 seconds? Because if you're not, and you have to decode it, then this is not good from the point of view of your project and overall control. The Americans have a word for the idea of visualizing a lot of their plans. I'm not a mad fan of the term, but they refer to them as information radiators. Get it on the wall, on a whiteboard, keep it low-tech. An example on the screen there is just a very simple idea of just simple shapes, simple colors to try and get across very simple information. Remember, in the DSDM community, Principle 8 is the idea of demonstrating control. And very importantly, if you can't do that immediately and you can't do that visibly, then you're not in control, is what DSDM is saying. So trying to get your plan visual and using a model is a challenge, but again, I think you'll find if you could get something on the wall and it's visual and attractive, I think you'll find you'll get an awful lot of benefit from it. Now, I've got another poll question for you, and this one is not slightly cheeky and slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I do have a serious question to ask you here, and it is about, in fact, I'll just launch it and let you read the poll so that you can then come up with your view. Now, I'm only asking your opinion here, so it doesn't, there's no right or wrong. And I'm not really being tongue-in-cheek, but I am asking a very serious question here. In your opinion, what is the best tool for planning and managing projects? So I'm really saying from your own experience, is it Microsoft Project or is it Microsoft PowerPoint? So give you another 10 seconds to have a look at that. A little bit more. Oh, got some interesting results coming through. There's still people coming in, so I'm going to give it just another 10 seconds actually. And it's swinging a lot here. Right, I think, are we just about all in? I think quite a lot of people have voted, so I'm going to now close the poll. Just about over 90% of people have voted there, so that's good. So my screen might go a little bit funny as I do this, and I will correct it. So if we have a look at the poll. Okay, so let's have a look. I'll be truthful to everyone on the webinar. I thought it was going to be a lot closer than that. Now, as I say, about 2/3 there going for Microsoft Project, but I do think it's quite interesting that 1 in 3 people think that if they were going to try and manage a project, they'd actually rather use PowerPoint. And let's be careful, I'm not here to criticize Microsoft Project. If you're working at sort of 1 year, 2 year strategic program level things, yeah, I've got no problem with that. But if you're actually in the here and now over sort of 2 weeks, surprisingly, a lot of people find it not very good. And one of the main reasons is the visualization of it, how it doesn't quite get the information across and easily. But anyway, I'll leave you with that thought, and I'll try and get back onto a bit more. Now, I've only got a few minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, I'll try and take those questions at the end. But as I say, when you're using modeling, think about everywhere you could use it. A couple of quick points. What's the difference between modeling and prototyping? Which, in simple terms, I don't really think they're that dissimilar. Modeling is normally quite static, diagrams, abstractions, it's very abstract, whereas prototyping is often a bit more dynamic and a bit real. You can play with a prototype, and you can move around it and click on a few buttons if it's an IT context. But there is a bit of a sort of twilight zone between the two. When does storyboarding, what is storyboarding? Is that prototype or is it a model? Screenshots, is that a prototype? Is it a model? And to be honest, I'm not really fussed. I think you could get some strong technical definitions of what they are, but just see modeling and prototyping as a bit like a spectrum, and one moves through into the other. Just don't worry is what I'm trying to say. Don't worry whether it's a prototype or a model. If it's a visual and it's getting you what you need, just go for it. Now, one of the main problems you might encounter when you're doing this is quite simply what I call the syntax police. Let's imagine you've managed to forget to put the start lozenge on your flowchart. Do you suddenly get descended upon by a lot of people saying, sorry, error, incorrect, and not necessarily getting into trouble, but do you actually get grief from it? Do you have to conform with exact syntaxes? Now, sometimes if you're working for something like National Power and you're trying to do something that's safety critical, then I'm all in favour of it. But if it's a 2-week time box and you're just trying to get some idea of models and processes, does it really matter that much? Again, it's seen as being unprofessional if you go low tech, but I'm trying to say go with it because it works. Remember also that not everybody talks in pictures. Some people like more textual information, so just bear that in mind. And also bear in mind you might need to comply with some sort of audit or ways of doing things. So these pictures you're drawing, will the people in quality control, compliance, your quality management systems, will they be okay that some of it is a bit informal? Again, a picture, a photograph of something on a whiteboard, what's wrong with that as long as it's demonstrable and it gets the information across. So just check and be careful with your modeling, doesn't come across any of these or fall foul of any of this. It shouldn't, but a lot depends on whether the people in sort of audit are, jobs worth mentality, or whether they're actually focused on the end result. So what tools you should use? I mean, to be honest, there's hundreds. I think you'd be very surprised. You can use just about anything. And one thing I would do is say, don't go and buy anything. Just have a look at what you've got. You can go for miles with things like Visio, PowerPoint and Word. I'm sorry to give you some proprietary names here, but things like Magic Flip Chart paper, get it on the wall, draw some diagrams, take a picture of it, move on. Things like Sharpies and fiber tip pens, you can draw some incredibly artistic things no matter how good you are, normally with a really good pen. Get it on a sheet of A4 landscape and photocopy it, move it around. This is a way of getting fast, high-speed, high-quality information around your project and around your organization. I'm forever taking my phone out of my pocket, taking 2 or 3 pictures of what we've done and emailing it around to the team. Job done. And if you get the right place with the right level of audit and the right attitude, they have no issue with this kind of way of capturing information. Finally, who models? Basically anyone. I think business analysts really should look at modelling and how well they can do this. So I think that's a core skill for the BA. But also project managers and team leaders, hiding behind Microsoft Project, get the thing visual, I think can be quite powerful. But it doesn't matter who you are, a business rep, developer, tester, more power to your elbow. So what I'm going to do now is just do a summary slide and then see if I can take some questions. Just one quick thing we do though is what we call rolling road training, where we can come in and if you're trying to do a project plan with a team, we can spend half a day or a day smashing through the thing, sort of learn as you go as opposed to set piece training. So this is the sort of thing we can help you with if that's of interest. So in summary, what I would say about your modelling is very simply this: go for it. Do something, do the simplest thing that works, and sort of don't be embarrassed. Just think, what's the worst case that could happen? If somebody's looking at you a bit funny, what's the worst thing that can happen? It's you're only trying to get a message across, and I don't think people realise how powerful and how useful it is, and that's why I'm saying try to go for it. Personally, I think if you get a really good model, something very good on the wall, it actually is impressive. It draws people's eyes, and people say, oh, who did that? Think about how the media talk to you. There's a whole new wave of things called infographics. I don't know whether you've seen this stuff where headline information is shown visibly with sort of percentages. That's the way we're going. And I would say to you, fortune favours the brave. I can't imagine anybody suffering from going and drawing lots and lots of pictures and to try and get the communication across. Right, I'm now going to have a look at some of the questions that are coming in and see if we can help with anything. So if you've got your text box up, you might want to be entering some information where I think Claire mentioned. So I'm going to have a little look with some of the things and some of the comments that are coming in from all over, lots of people. I'll address as many as I can. I'm going to come on to them straight away and then finish at about 12:50. Any questions we don't answer, we come to you afterwards. And remember, this whole webinar has been recorded, so if you need to get an audio copy of it, that's not a problem at all. So we've got loads coming in, so there's no way I can get them all done in the time, but I'll try and do as many as I can. Renee has said it's a double-edged sword, planning very difficult to managing, and I totally agree. Therefore, if you can plan, get the plan visual, I think it will help you manage. You still have to manage the people. I have absolutely no problem with that, so Renee, I totally agree with that. Another question here is using UML a disadvantage within a DSTM project? Does it get in the way? And that's from Anthony, and my short answer to that is, unfortunately, the word depends. By and large, I would say it would most of the time. It really depends on the mechanics down at the bottom level. What are we trying to do with the modeling? Because sometimes UML adds a lot of value. It gets people consistent. You might be generating code from the actual UML. But as a rule, I've found, and I can only tell you what's happened to me, and I've seen in real life, I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people trained in UML and nobody using it within 3 weeks of coming back on a training course. Now, you need to look deeper into why that is, but the main reason is that it's not helping with communication. So you've got to look at the needs of your project, you've got to look at the needs of how you're writing software, but generally I would say don't use it unless someone can come up with a very good reason why to do it. Product-based planning for modelling from Pritam. That's quite a good point actually, and therefore if you can, using post-its, using Visio, if you can knock out a very simple plan using, and importantly on the post-it notes, make sure you write the end state, the completed product. Don't use any words ending in ing is the rule of thumb there, but very simple ideas of what needs to be achieved on the project. Break down the structures so that you can see, you know, a house is made up of a roof, walls, foundations. So PBP, or product-based planning, and using graphical ways of doing that, and use a lot of informal stuff on it as well. You know, don't necessarily be a slave to the exact syntax. Put an asterisk on it if that's going to be done by so-and-so. Again, very low in syntax and actually quite useful. So I think there's some very powerful stuff there in product-based planning. Now, what else have I got here? Have you any advice for tools to map pipelines across multiple teams? Now, if that's work pipelines, again, this is where I think the picture that was shown in the presentation there, you might find there's some very simple graphics. You can even draw pipes with something like Visio or PowerPoint and explain the things that are going on there. My advice to you is to start very informal, you know, rough piece of paper, draw things. Maybe I've got a rule of thumb which I call version 4, namely by the time you get to version 4 you can put that in an electronic tool like PowerPoint or like Visio. But I think the idea of multiple teams and pipelines, if you could try and show that graphically about where it all is, it becomes very attractive. One of my customers has got something where they're showing all the pipelines of different work, and they show all the work with little bits of cards stuck on Velcro, which is a little bit elaborate, but it can they move it around. But they've also got their own characters, and the teams they've chosen themselves a character from South Park. They've all got a South Park identity, and it's actually their real person. It's just they've drawn a South Park character. And with this sort of visualization and the pipelines, everyone can see where things are. And everywhere you go around this customer of ours, you know, it's these pipelines are on the wall. They're everywhere. There must be, I don't know, 20 pictures of these pipelines all over the place to try and get a visualization of how the pipelines are going. But they are just low-tech, simple syntax. They're not coming from some fancy tool at all. Comment from Lee here. Formal notation conveys the idea to people not in the room. How can you be sure you achieve this if it's ad hoc notation? And now that's a really powerful point, and I totally agree with it. And this is why, if you're working for a large organization, I did a project for lots of electricity companies at one point, and we all had to speak the same language. So we actually had to standardize on notation. And that's an example of where maybe we do need more richer syntax. We do need to be more prescriptive. So what you need to do with any model is to say, how prescriptive have we got to be here? And therefore, if you have got other people who've not been involved in the making of the model and they read it, they need to know what it means. But you'd be amazed how far you can go with a very simple key. So for example, a dotted line might mean this only applies on Saturdays and Sundays, or green might mean this is the new area and all the existing stuff is in black. So as long as the key and the syntax is reasonably, how would you say, intuitive, then you can go a long way. But I do take the sort of underlying point that Lee's making there, that there are times when you know, if you're building something, let's say it's something safety critical or it's a nuclear power station, then, you know, fluffy clouds and, you know, stick people might not be, you know, fit for purpose. But the learning point is do what is fit for purpose, what gets the message across. And ironically, if it is safety critical, sometimes it's more important to get the message across. And therefore, I'm not saying be imaginative and creative, but don't get bogged down in lots of syntax that could actually create a problem. Right, there are still other questions, and I will promise to get these sorted out for you. And I'm really pleased with the level of questions that have actually come in and the people who've been listening to the webinar. I hope you've got something from the webinar and got some information there. I've just got a slide there on some information and next steps that may be of interest to you. In terms of our next webinar is on the 21st. We're running that one at 12:30. And we've got an Agile project management training course on May the 28th in London. There's plenty you can download from our new website that Claire mentioned. There's your Twitter, Facebook information for you to have a look at if you like. And what I'm going to do now is bring Claire back in and say thank you very much for everyone who's listened to the webinar.
Thanks very much, Keith. Yep, as you can see there, well, you've now got our email addresses on there, so if you want to ask Keith any more questions on this subject, then feel free to drop Keith an email at k.richards@agilekrc.com. If you want to request a copy of the slides from today's webinar, feel free to drop me an email. There's my email address there. And also, if you want to access any of the previous recordings of the previous webinars, again, drop me an email and I'd be happy to send you the link so you can watch those. So as Keith said, the next webinar is on the 21st of May, so I hope you can join us then. Any questions at all, drop us an email or do get in touch with us, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks a lot.